Okay, time now for another video presentation, and this time around we're going to talk about the human population and what its impact on the planet is. This is Chapter 6. Okay, so there are a lot of people on the planet right now. In the United States, presently there are 325 million people. That could be different depending on when you're watching this video, because that number seems to keep going up. In 1964, when I was born, there were 191 million people here. So I've certainly seen the population grow a little bit in my lifetime anyway. The world's population when I was born was 3.3 billion, and now we're up around 7.5 billion people. That's in the year 2017, toward the end of the year 2017. So if this is any later than that, you might want to check it to see where it's at. So there are estimates that we're going to continue to go up in people and population, of course, and that's going to have some challenges. So where is the carrying capacity for our species, and what should we do about this? We've tried to do some. People have tried to do things in different countries about it. There have been policies, and well, it's certainly something that we'll have to face as long as there are limited resources and a growing population. Okay, so there are a lot of things going on here with human beings. If there's more people, there's more chances for diseases to be spread. We're more connected than we ever were before. And really all these problems that are listed on the screen right now, you can imagine how they would tie in to the idea of more people being there on the planet. So these are all problems that we're facing. And here's a picture of a street in China. And of course the idea is that it's very crowded. Apparently the subways are so crowded they have people whose job is just to push people onto subway cars to keep them moving. I don't know, I haven't been there. Some of you have, I know, who are watching this. But very interesting what we're going to do with the human population. What can we do? How many people can we handle here? Are we going to be able to make changes that allow us to have more people on the planet? We've certainly done that already. We've had technological advances that allow us to have more people, even starting with agriculture. Will there be other big jumps up that will support more people, or are we going to feel the pressures for this? Okay, so the human population is continuing to grow, and of course we would look into the reasons behind that, why that's happening. In some places, the amount of children that are born to a family are a lot more than they are currently here in the United States. And right now, the number of children born in the United States in a family is way less than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So there's a lot more going on here. Mostly the population is growing in the so-called developing part of the world. So in that place, that's where most of the population is growing. So in China and in India, these are places where the population is growing. And that's why I say so-called developing nations, because there are parts of China and India that are just very well developed, very highly advanced technology-wise, and but they are developing in other parts of their country. Okay, and again, of course, that comes to the question here of how much are we going to be able to support? How many people can the planet support? Okay, so this is an idea of a curve here, some projections, and so we're at about 7.5 billion. So these progressions at this point said that we're going to go up in population. So we have to think about what that'll mean. Okay, and we've done all kinds of things here to support ourselves, and these are things that we have to think about. They come to the core of the class here, and you'll be asked to make many connections between these things. Our use of resources and how it affects the world around us. So all these things on the screen here, which you could read as well as I could read them to you, are things that we should be aware of. Okay. And things that we've talked about already. So now we're taking the knowledge that we've built, or the knowledge base that we've built, and we're going to apply it in new and different ways, continue to make more connections. Okay, so let's talk some definitions here for this chapter anyway. And so births is fertility, and deaths is mortality, and then there is migration. So these are ways that populations can change. And here is the population change equation. And we probably went over that already in class, but it's an important one, so we mention it again, and of course it makes sense. You're gaining from births and immigration, and you are losing from deaths and emigration. So that will give you the raw number for how much your population is growing. Crude birth rate and crude death rate are how many people are dying per a certain number of your population. And the number that they use, and it's important to know this, for crude birth rate and crude death rate is 1,000. So it's the number of people that die out of 1,000, or are born out of 1,000. Okay, so this is the idea of the population here. This was back in 2008, so already things have changed. At that time, the population of the United States was 304 million. They were projecting 357 by 2025, and as I said, we're about 335 million right here in 2018. So we do seem to be on the way. And they are projecting population growth in many places in the world. And also interesting to note places where they are expecting a drop in population. You can see that in some places as well. And that itself has impacts. And we'll talk about them in this chapter. Okay, so replacement level fertility rate is how many children a couple would have to have in order to keep the population stable. And you might think, well, it's going to be 2. That makes sense. 2 people should have 2 children to replace them. But it's not that simple, really. The replacement level fertility rate has to be a little bit higher because of infant mortality. And infant mortality is a good indicator of how healthy a country is, right? How many infants are dying out in their first year. So, of course, you have to have more children if you have a high infant mortality rate just to replace your population. Okay, so the total fertility rate is the total births for all women in a population. And the fertility rate is the births for a woman in her lifetime, if you talked about that. Okay, so there has been a drop in the U.S., and that's cut down the rate of population growth. The population is still growing, but it's not growing quite as fast as it did in other times of our history, which we'll also talk about in detail on slides that are upcoming. So there has been an increase since 1900, and I already told you there's been a pretty big increase in my lifetime. That's not quite since 1900, but 1964 anyway. And there has been a change. We've gone through a transition in the United States in the last 100 years that is pretty remarkable, and a big technology boost up, and we've become a lot more affluent, and especially after World War II. And then the baby boom hit, and I'm about the last of the baby boomer generation. No, there's a lot of us still left, but 1964 is about the last year of what they call the baby boomers. So I'm one of the last born of the baby boomers. There's still some of us around now, and that has an impact on the population as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, so all right, so this is the idea of the baby boom. And that you can see 1964 on the end of it. I should have showed you this slide when I was saying that. But yeah, there was more children born. It dropped off as we became more progressed. And then there was a big jump up in affluence at this time. And we had a big jump up in families. And then it leveled off a little bit here in the United States. And that's what this graph is showing. Okay. And again, this shows the time periods that are going on, and it is the end of World War II that brings in that affluence that has a big jump up here. So we were going through a transition here, and earlier in the century there was a lot more agriculture going on with families and a lot more of a rural lifestyle, which we later shifted over to a lot more cities, but in that time we needed more children to help run those businesses. And with the Industrial Revolution really kicking into full gear here, we didn't need quite as large a labor force for family-run businesses. Okay, so this is another thing that I'm happy about, especially as I'm getting a little bit older. We have some things in the U.S. that are going up here a little bit, and life expectancy is one that I'm interested in. 47, so if I was born in 64, I would be over the life expectancy of 1900. So I still got a little bit to go here for the 2000 life expectancy, but I'm going to take it as far as I can. This is another big transition here, right? Women working outside of the home. I've seen a big transition in that in my lifetime. High school graduates, look at that. Homes with flush toilets, only 10% in 1900. Can you imagine that? 2% had electricity. And in that short period of time, 100 years, we've really gone through some changes here. And then there was a big move out to the suburbs. That was also a big part of it after the baby boomers, suburbs. Okay, and here you go again, and we're a lot more affluent than we used to be as well. Okay, and okay, so homicides are up too. That's something I've said in class before, probably. I wish people would just stop killing people across the boards. That would be good. But that number has gone up. Okay, so this is the stuff I've talked about as before. We needed the children as part of the labor force in the not too distant past here, and it was, but now what we're talking about is the cost of raising children and educating children is becoming a lot higher. So families don't feel they need as many for the labor force, and they are more to afford, cost more to afford them. And then things that are going to affect this too are pensions, and that's going to be security for people after they're able to work anymore. And that's something that also means that maybe you would have less children, because if you have a way to be supported in your old age, you might not have as many children, because the idea was the more children you had, the more possible people you had to support you in your old age. But if there's pensions, that's less of a concern. Okay. And of course, the women having more opportunities seems to be a part of the advancement of our countries, and it's certainly been a big shift over in the United States. And I think for the better, definitely for the better. Okay, so yes, the infant mortality rate is going to affect how many children, as I've said before, how old you are when you have your children, what kind of family planning there is that's going on, and also cultural beliefs as well. So there's a lot of different things that go into it. So there's no clear-cut answers or clear-cut understanding of all the issues. It really takes a lot to figure out what's going on. Okay, so as far as death rates, life expectancy is going to have something to do with it. And also the infant mortality rate. The more infants that die, the more, the higher rate you have of your crude death rate. And there we go. So now people are living longer and fewer infants are dying. And that seems to be a good thing as well. And what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that's true? Maybe that's something that we could bring into class, but that's a great question. Okay, I'm sure we could talk more about it than the little bit we're going to cover here. In the U.S., here are some reasons that the infant mortality rate is higher than it could be, so these are good ones to know. And you can read them as well as I can read them to you. So here we go. Okay. So here are things that are also going to affect one of the other parts of the equation of population growth, the migration part of things. If people think they can be improved economically, they're going to try to migrate. And maybe for religious or political freedom, and wars and environmental as well. So this is something to watch out. This is something that the Pentagon in the United States is currently saying is going to be one of the biggest security issues in the future, and that is refugees due to changing environments where people have to leave where they are, and of course that puts stress and pressures on other places as well. And that can force you to move. If you can't live in the area that you are living in, or trying to live in, you're going to go someplace else, and that can affect that, and that makes sense. All right. So immigration has been very important for the United States, and really, I guess unless you're Native American, we're all descendants of immigrants. So there's a big population growth in the United States that boomed up because of immigrants, and that has really helped to build the country. So each generation, it seems to have immigrants coming from different places, or a large number of immigrants coming from different places. But we are pretty much all immigrants here in the United States other than the Native Americans. And then there is the question of how many people you'll let in, how you will legislate that. And of course right now in 2017, as I'm talking, there's a lot of talk about the illegal immigration and people who are coming here without going through the proper channels, and what impact does that have? And people are divided by what they think the impacts of that is. It's also another very difficult issue to just figure out in one shot. Okay, so here is the idea of the numbers. During the Depression, we had limited, you can see, there was a drop-off in the number of immigrants, and we felt the population had grown enough, so they had some laws here, and then through the Depression, and then it's gone up again. So we spiked, and there's been this is the trend of it here in the United States, and that's for legal immigration. And then harder, of course, to get the numbers on illegal immigration. Okay, so these are age structures, and this is going to talk about growth and decline, and there's something intuitive about this, but it's good to see them. And the idea is you're going to break your population into males and females, typically, and you're also going to talk about categories of where they're going to be: pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive, and I think those terms are pretty self-explanatory. But here on the far left, you have a country that's growing rapidly, and that makes sense. A lot of their population is younger, pre-reproductive. They're about to have a big boost up, and that's going to work its way up through their population. And here's expanding slowly, and that's a large part because of also the immigration that we have going on in the United States. We have that. So this is a pyramid here that looks to be a little different than the one on the left, right? That population is not going to grow as quickly. And then you can see as you move down here, a stable culture like Japan or Italy or Greece, and then declining countries as well, where you can see that they're a little bit heavier on the top end of things. And how they handle those issues and what those issues are very important. So here again is the idea of your typical developed country where you have a lower amount of population and it is growing or declining, growing slowly or declining. And in developing countries you have a very large population already and it is growing rapidly because there's so many young members, so many members on the young end. So these are countries that are developing. All right, so this is the baby boomers that I am a part of, as I was saying. And what's going to happen? The baby boomers were a big chunk of the population, so is there going to be a hard time with the declining growth rate of births in the United States to fill all those jobs? And that's going to be the question of immigration too. If you don't have enough people, you're going to want to bring some people in if those jobs are going undone, because that's not going to be great for your economy either. But here's the idea of the boomer population. 1955, they were 0 years old, just being born, just starting. And look at the way we're moving up through the chain here. So in the 80s, we were a good portion of the population, and now we're moving up into these upper brackets. And that has some impact. Why the baby boomers start to retire, the jobs are empty, but they also have to be supported in some way. And if you have some kind of Social Security like we do, now you have less people paying in potentially to the Social Security than you have people collecting. When we were boomers down here, there were more of us. That was pretty good for paying into those systems. But that becomes a problem, and definitely an economic reality to all this as well. Okay, so if your population is going, like I said, you can be cut down on the amount of labor that you have. There's going to be bigger deficits because it's harder to fund the pension, pay for the health care for those individuals, and maybe they got to cut the pensions. Well, we'll see what happens. But yeah, less revenues. Less new businesses, less new technology. Well, these are some of the problems that are potentially going to happen. But I would think that we would try our best to avoid some of these things, right? There's been a rise and fall in the fortunes of the United States, as there are other places in the world as well. And it's pretty interesting to know some of the factors involved in this. Another very complicated one to understand all the ins and outs of. Okay, so you can also lose a population, and this is a little bit of a case study that they did on the AIDS tragedy, and I can remember that in the 1980s as I was moving through the age structures from my boomerhood from 1964. And yeah, that was a bit of a shakeup. We seem in the United States to have it a bit under control right now. But in other parts of the world, they've taken a bigger hit. And of course, usually it will be that. The less money there is, the bigger the hit that you'll take within a population and also country to country if you judge them about the amount of wealth that they have. But in some places, this really dropped the life expectancy. In some places in Africa in particular, it's just killing off lots and lots of people. And still a little tougher for them to eradicate or control it. And as I said, we've had more success in the United States with that, which is a good thing. Okay, so let's see. So how can we slow this down? Well, China had the one-child policy that we'll talk about a little bit. That was one way to do it. We have more family planning than we had before. There's more of an awareness of these things. And yeah, so there are a lot of different things that people have tried, and there's a lot of forces that drive this stuff too. So do we want to slow human population? And could we if we wanted to? By the way, again, when you ask that question, you should also ask, is it something that you want to do? Maybe you don't want the population to decline. A lot of this is personal stuff. All right, so here are the transitions. These are called the demographic transitions. And this is kind of a rough idea, or a pretty good idea, of how a country goes through stages as it develops, and the United States has done this already. So first, you're before you're industrial, you have a high birth rate, and you also have a high death rate. You don't have the best medicine yet. This was the United States when life expectancy was 47. This is where we were at. The industrial age hadn't really hit in yet. So then you have the transitional phase, and in this phase you are getting better food, you're getting better medicine, better sanitation, all these factors that are going to go into a better quality of life, and a lot that we maybe take for granted sometimes. I know I certainly have. But really can improve the life. So from demographic-wise, at this point you're more industrialized probably. You're getting to the point of being industrialized. You're getting better sanitation. People are living longer. So the death rate drops in this transitional phase. But the birth rate doesn't right away. Well, one thing is people are used to doing things in a certain way, and the change may seem sudden to us, but it's a gradual change, and people have customs and beliefs, and maybe that's going to tie into the idea of how many children they're going to continue to have. Some of these are religious or cultural beliefs and about having children, and that you should have a lot of children. And so these things take a little while to change as well. And they don't totally, but typically we can see in this phase, toward the end of it, the birth rate starts to drop off. And now you're going to say you're industrial here, so the population growth it's kind of leveling off here, and we've seen these kind of curves in previous chapters talking about other species, but the human species is not immune to this, of course. This is the way it works. But here we're becoming more industrial, a little bit more affluent. This is the world that I grew into. And there the birth rate is starting to drop. Remember, I was the end of the baby boomers. And then the death rate was also dropping. Population starts to slow. And then you have the post-industrial, where the population growth will decline a little after a while. And the birth rate will go below the death rate. And of course that's going to lead to a population decline. So you should know the 4 stages, and you should know what's driving it, and what the birth rate and the death rate and the population are doing during those phases. And that's about right. You can see here in the pre-industrial, right, this is what we talked about with the equation. This doesn't talk about immigration or emigration, so of course that's going to be a factor as well. But here, if the birth rate and the death rate are both high but about even, well, the population isn't going to really be growing then, but it will shoot up when those dynamics change. Okay, so we know that part of what's going on here is family planning, make people aware of what's going on, maybe talk about the idea of ways of preventing pregnancies, because we know those are possible as well, and of course that ties into religious beliefs as well. So, it's maybe an education of what's possible. But people certainly here in the United States have a chance to choose on those things currently. So that's one thing that they could do. Bringing people out of poverty. People in poverty, again, maybe feel they need more children to help them and to support them. And they're also maybe not looking at family planning as much. And that can help out. And of course the big one here too is the changing status of women. That, if women are making decisions, maybe they want to have jobs or lives that are more involved than just being a stay-at-home mother, which was pretty much the regular thing in 1964 when I was born, and it certainly isn't quite as much so in the United States anymore. Okay, so this can, another way I look at it is, if we were ruling out half of the population, I've been teaching now for 20 years, and I don't see where the guys, sorry, I don't see that you're any smarter than the ladies. I see that it's people are kind of people. But think about that as far as innovation and, people that were going to be able to lead and to, really help to develop the world. We were cutting about half of them out. We were cutting the women out. So that's pretty interesting. They get a little bit of power, but I think it gives back in a big way. You've opened up 50% more. You've doubled. You've doubled your available people to do some good there. And this is an interesting quote. Poor women only holiday is when they are asleep. It's a lot of hard work in developing countries. Women are maybe, in some places, the role is to get the water or to get the wood for burning, because you can't just do some of the things that, like turn a faucet or turn on your stove. There it's a little bit different. So this is a pretty common thing in developing parts of the world. And Africa would be another one. I'd mentioned India and touched on the idea of China. Although China is very interesting as far as population development as well, with the one-child policy. So with the one-child policy, that was the idea. They were going to cut the population growth because they saw it as a problem. But there was also, there was more of a, I guess by and large in the Chinese culture, there's more of a premium put on a male child. So they were finding there was more males being born than females. And of course, the odds are 50-50, so why would there be more males being born? And there's a bit of a, that's a rough thing to be thinking about there. But they ended up with a gender imbalance, and they were cutting their population as the older folks are growing. They got a little bit of an imbalance there. And I believe at this point, at least in this current year, you've already read 3 articles about the China one-child policy. But that's one that we're going to follow as the years go on. So the latest article was from 2017. But it might be a different situation when you watch this video. All right. Well, that's it for Chapter 6. So thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. And I look forward to seeing you all back in class.
People